In the early 70s, the United States was experiencing a period of social transition. Universities were expanding, young people were traveling freely, community was built on trust, often assuming that dangers come from strangers or people who look dangerous. In times, few imagined that one of the most notorious cases in American history would involve someone who appeared educated, polite, and approachable. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy. For years, his presence went largely unnoticed. He attended a college classes, volunteered in political campaigns, held conversations easily. Too many people often consider him approachable, polite, and kind. But behind the appearance, investigators would later uncover a prolonged pattern of criminal behavior that spanned multiple states and challenged law enforcement systems across country. Ted Bundy was born in 1946. Much of his earlier background remained complex, with conflicting accounts regarding his family structure and upbringing. What is confirmed through public record is that he grew up primarily in Washington state and demonstrated above average intelligence from a young age. As a student, Bundy showed interest in psychological related topics, law, and politics. He was articulated and confident in conversation, capable of pretending and presenting himself convincingly. Former classmates later described him as ambitious, someone who wanted recognition and validation. At some point, his earlier adult years, he did fit the stereotype commonly associated with people with violent offenders. This disconnect would rather become one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. By the early 90s, Bundy was living in the Pacific Northwest. He attended a University of Washington and worked various jobs to support himself. He volunteered in crisis hotline, a role that requires empathy and patience and calm communication. Co-workers recall that he performed his duty competently. Nothing in his behavior immediately raised alarm. At the early stage, college campuses across Washington and Oregon began to report unexplained disappearance. Young women vanished without a clear sign of struggle. Initially, these cases were treated as isolated incidents. There was no immediate reason to assume they were connected. But in 1974 and 1975, a number of missing persons grew. Witnesses in the several cases recall that they encountered a man called himself Ted. He often appeared injured, wearing a cast or a sling. He asked for assistance with routine tasks. Some witnesses noted that a small light-colored Volkswagen. At this time, this detail did not seem significant, or on their own, it never made sense. But as investigators compared reports and similarities began to emerge, still convinced and remained limited. There was no central criminal database. Communication between jurisdictions was slow. Forensic science was far less advanced than it is today. As a result, connecting the case proved extremely difficult. Eventually, Bundy's name surfaced as a potential person of interest. He matched a certain description. He owned a Volkswagen similar to the ones mentioned by the victims. However, suspicion alone was not enough to justify arrest. Without a direct evidence, law enforcement could not move forward. Bundy remained free. Meanwhile, public anxiety increased in disappearance and it continued. In 1975, a turning point occurred in Utah. A woman reported being abducted but managed to escape. Her testimony proved the investigators and provided them with a direct survival account. Bundy was arrested and charged with kidnapping. This marked the first successful prosecution tied to the pattern an investigator had suspected. He was convicted and sentenced to prison. For a brief moment, he appeared to be a threat and was contained. but the case was far from over. In 1977, Bundy escaped from custody. The escape shocked law enforcement. After being recaptured, he escaped again. This successfully left the state wondering. This event would rather be cited as a major failure in correctional security. During the period, Bundy traveled to Florida. Due to a limited interstate communication, authorities in Florida were immediately not aware of the full extent of his criminal history. In the early 1978, Bundy was arrested in Florida following a series of incidents. Unlike earlier investigations, this evidence was substantial. Witness and forensic analysis, physical documentation connected him directly to the crimes. This case now had a national attention. Media coverage intensified. For the first time, the public began to see the scope of what the investigators believed and occurred across several states. Bundy trial became one of the most publicized court proceedings in American history. He made unusual decision to represent himself. The court proceeded with televised and a rare occurrence at the time. Prosecutors presented extensive evidence including eyewitness testimony, forensic analysis, pattern comparison, expert witnesses, and juries deliberated carefully. Unfortunately, for lack of evidence from the earlier case, so ultimately, Bundy was found guilty. He was sentenced to death under Florida law. While in incarceration, Bundy became a subject of intensified psychological interest. Researchers, journalists, and investigators sought to understand how someone with such an abnormal appearance could engage in prolonged criminal behavior. During interviews, Bundy often avoided direct responsibility. He spoke in abstract terms, something describing criminal behavior as though he was an observer rather than a participant. In his incarceration, he provided information that helped clarify unresolved cases, the earlier cases. These statements were used by investigators to confirm timelines and bring partial closure to families. Ted Bundy was executed in 1989. With his death, the legal process ended. However, the case continued to be studied in academic law enforcement and psychological settings. Bundy case was fundamentally changed into criminal investigation in the United States. It led to the improvement of interstate information sharing, development of behavioral profiling units, stronger custodial procedures, public safety education. It has reshaped the assumptions about criminal appearance. The idea that danger could be hidden behind intelligence, politeness, and social status became a central lesson. Rather than being remembered solely for his crime, Bundy is now examined as a study in the systematic failure and reform. It highlighted limitation of forensic method, importance of witness coordination, risk of understanding suspects, necessity of national-based database. Modern investigative systems were built in part to prevent similar failures. The story of Ted Bundy is not one of mystery alone. It reminded of how institutions evolve, often after tragedy reveals their weakness. Through investigators, prosecutors, and reform, the criminal justice system learned lessons that continue to influence the modern-day policing. This documentary is based entirely on the available court recordings, investigators, and historical evidence, and it is presented for educational purposes only. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.